Well, hi everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. My guest today is the very Reverend Mark Oakley, and Mark is the Dean of Southwark Cathedral. He was formerly the Dean of St John's College in Cambridge. So hopefully it's going to be a fascinating conversation for you to enjoy about church life and church matters and church politics, a bit of everything, I hope. And also, if you like the Godcast, do check out YouTube and Anchor or any of the podcast sites. There's hundreds of interviews there with people from a religious background, but also musicians, celebrities, politicians, news people. It's a really varied and well, there's many flavors for everybody, so do check it out. Also, if you enjoy what I do, check out my book, Our Daily Bread, From Argos to the Altar, a priest story, which is published by Harper North and is out now. You'll find that on Amazon and in Waterstones and such like. So, yeah, welcome to the Godcast, and I do hope you now enjoy this interview with Mark Oakley. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is the very Reverend Mark Oakley, who is the Dean of Southwark Cathedral. Mark, it's fabulous to get you on the Godcast. How are you?
I'm very well, Alex. Thank you very much.
Well, Mark, as we record this, we're in the height of a British summer, and recent events have been all over the news about disturbances. And just wonder if I could ask you for a few thoughts on recent events, what's been happening in the City of London.
Well, I went over to Waterstone's bookshop last Saturday and unknowingly found myself getting caught up in the Tommy Robinson protest in Trafalgar Square, which first, I think, really brought back to me just how serious this situation is in many respects. I have to say, at one point, Tommy Robinson mentioned LGBTQ, and the whole square booed. And I have to be honest, although I've been in the church as an openly gay priest for 30 years and have, got my scars and bruises through all that, I think that was the first time as a citizen I felt very vulnerable actually standing there. And once again, it brought home to me just how the values that we think are being upheld generally in society aren't, and they have to be fought and won. So I'm not a natural Eeyore, but I'm a bit gloomy at the moment, and I have a long history of interest in hate crime. I brought together a hate crime service when I was at St Paul's Cathedral, and I feel very strongly about human dignity and how hate crime attacks the dignity which is within every human person. So yes, I'm feeling a bit gloomy, but also, my goodness me, if the church can't see its vocation at a time like this, we might as well give up. There is no point the church having unemployed love, and now's the time to really voice it and show it.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting question that I like. Well, I think it's interesting, Mark. You might think it's tosh, but you say it's an important time, and if church can't be church now, that when can it be? And of course, many Christians will be denouncing and calling out the shocking behaviour. Just from a Christian context, Mark, just with your experience, I wonder what your response might be to people who are actually perpetrating that. Maybe they walked into the cathedral one day and said, "Look, this is where I am. This is why I'm doing this." How do you think we should approach these people?
Well, to keep hold of that word people and human and to listen, we all know that at the root of this are very deep-seated issues, which are about inequality and poverty and a sense of not being listened to. All those issues need to be attended to. They don't justify what's happening. but they need attending to. So I would hope that where I will strongly disagree and be relentless and unapologetic about what I believe about human dignity of all, um, what what's the point of having values and beliefs if you're not ready to discuss them with other people? And that's why I'm in this role, I think. Hard though it is, but one thing I've learned as a dean, I think, and I've been doing it very often, so I feel a bit fraudulent saying that, but one of the things I think I've been reminded of is that often the harder thing is the better thing. So we can spend a lot of our time trying to avoid the harder thing, which we really know is the best, the thing you ought to do. And yeah, I've been learning that again in this role.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody in a different context earlier, and they were going through a few problems, and I was trying to encourage them to have the hard conversations. I think we have to go there, don't we? We have to be
Mm.
prepared to sit down with these people and have a conversation. Just in terms of your new role as dean at Southwark, Mark, has that been a smooth change in life for you? Just tell us about you. You've been there 7 or 8 months now, is it? How's it going? And is it living up to expectations, or is it fraught with challenges?
Both. Well, I'm sponsored by Nurofen, I think now, but no, I absolutely love it. Southwark is the greatest part of London, I think. I mean, it's just a fabulous part of London, great people, wonderful spirit in the air, real challenges in the borough, of course, enormous diversity. And every dean is juggling about 4 different roles. Chief executive of a charity now, with all the governance and compliance. You're, the senior priest of the diocese, so you've got a diocesan role. You're the head of the cathedral as a congregation and as a spiritual community. And also you're a local player. You're an ambassador for the cathedral in a locality and in a place like mine. I just love that sort of local engagement. Just thinking last week I was blessing the bakery next to the cathedral for Lammas Day, and this week I'm blessing the second flush of Darjeeling for the wonderful Indian family who sell tea in the market. That sort of engagement's always inspired me.
You're giving a really nice image of the context, but just expand on that a bit, Mark. I mean, I'm in a very small provincial town in East Lancashire, a very different context to central London.
Yeah.
What I was trying to think what people might like to know about Southwark Cathedral. What differentiates it from the other, very historical famous sites such as St Paul's Cathedral, where you also worked, and
Mm.
Westminster Abbey? Is there a subtle difference, or is it quite profound?
Um, I find it a little bit difficult to answer that question. I think I'm learning an answer there, trying to feel my way through it. It does feel different. I think it may be something to do with the area. So, it was called the Liberty of Southwark because Southwark was across the river. And if you had to go and live in the city or work in the city, you had to abide by the laws and the customs of the city. If you wanted a good time, you got on a boat and crossed the river where none of those regulations were in place. So this is where all the theatres were, the sex workers were, and a lot of the taverns. Now, I'm not saying that's what it is like now, although there are some comparisons to be made. But the dedication of the cathedral is St Mary Overy, which is nothing to do with ovaries. It means St Mary's over the river. And I think, in a sense, there is something still about the cathedral which makes it feel somewhat liberated from establishments. It's always had a slightly edgy vocation, speaking up on issues, being radical in the right way, I would hope. so the tone is a little bit different, I think, from places I've worked in the past, and I love it, and I feel very committed to it.
And in terms of the work of a cathedral, Mark, often people just see them as tourist destinations, don't they? Which they are for some
Yeah,
people.
yeah,
That's the purpose of the building for them. But for
yeah.
you living, working there, just tell us a bit more about the work of a cathedral beyond welcoming tourists to the city.
Yeah, I mean, it's slightly easier for me now in that we don't charge visitors at Southwark Cathedral. I understand why cathedrals have to, because the bills are big. Um, but I always felt very uncomfortable walking past the tills every time I went into St Paul's when I worked there. We don't have that, so obviously we need people to be generous if they can, but uh, so welcome is an enormous part of the Southwark tone. Um, so also is convening. The vocation of a cathedral to convene is still quite strong, bringing people together. I have a thing which I grandly call the Dean's breakfast. Well, actually, it's a croissant and a cup of coffee, but I invite people from the locality who've probably never met one another before.
Mm.
And it could be a former Lord Mayor of London sitting next to somebody who runs a charity with black kids with mental health issues in South London, and putting them all together. And what I love is we have no agenda. And as I hear them all leave, I only invite 10 of them each time, but you can hear things happening, them swapping phone numbers and getting stuff,
Yeah.
on the planning diary. So the convening vocation is important. Of course, the worship is primary, and I think churches and cathedrals really need to be unapologetic about not trying to replicate the high street. What we're offering is a space to explore the invitation and the mystery of God. And if we lose that, we really have sold out. So that's a very important part of a cathedral's life, is those 4 daily services we have. And I also think it's a place, a place of continuity and an enormously, and continuously changing environment. It's buildings always going on, something's going up, something's coming down. Cathedral just sits there like a little hen sitting on its nest, hopefully hatching something that's important. We're just renewing our vision at the moment, new dean, new vision. And we've come up with this idea of making space for love with heart, mind, and soul, simply because I think, a busy city, which can be distracted and very lonely and very competitive, really needs places that make space for love and some kindness and some space for people just to, catch up with their heads and their hearts. So I also think the space that we have is an important contribution to.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you need people to be generous. Do you find that people are?
Yes, I do. Extraordinarily so sometimes. And I'm not just thinking about money. I'm thinking about the over 400 volunteers we have at the cathedral who give up a lot of time and energy and stick with us. They're doing lots and lots of stuff. Sometimes they're welcoming visitors, or maybe they're sitting at the welcome desk in the office, or maybe they're doing the flowers. An enormous range of stuff that volunteers get involved with, and they're generous in that way too.
We've only been talking 10 or 15 minutes, Mark, and you've already sold it to me. You made it my intention that when I'm down with General Synod next, that I'm going to do my very best to come along, because I think these places, that's what they're for. That's and people forget that sometimes, don't they? they see the differences that we argue about, and they see maybe built, we've got a church near us that's closed, and it looks quite a sad, a very unwelcoming place, which it has become, unfortunately. So all power to your elbow, and thanks for just sharing some of that context with me and the audience. I just want to move on, Mark. There's a couple of things I want to talk about you more church matters, and you perhaps wouldn't be surprised that I want to speak to you about LLF. As you said, you are an openly gay priest, and I'm on General Synod, and I've had numerous conversations with guests about the Living in Love and Faith program. What's your assessment of where we are with it, Mark, and how do you see, with your wisdom and your experience, how do you see this playing out in the coming years? Particularly in London, there's this, the Alliance are kind of breaking ranks, aren't they? And the church seems particularly broken in London, more than anywhere else, perhaps.
Yeah. I'm not a very churchy political animal. So I can't, endlessly quote reports and, General Synod papers. And I don't have a very strong sense about maneuvering and all that sort of stuff. It's just never really been part of me. I have a very simple theology, I think, and forgive me for it. But, I do actually believe that where love is, God is. And that's really at the heart of what I believe. So, of course, I get deeply frustrated being part of a church where people are criticizing, condemning, or doubting the love that people have for one another. And therefore, I get very impatient. I'm very lucky in Southwark at the moment. I can almost operate in Southwark Cathedral as if these things aren't happening outside in the wider church, because it's the sort of issue that Southwark for a long while has been very resolved on. That again, we want to make space for love. However, I know it's not like that in the wider church, and of course, I do have some bruises from my past where people have, had a go at me for my views on marriage and civil partnerships. If we look back a little bit further, how it's going to pan out, I have no idea. A bishop said to me once, "You've got to understand, Mark, I'm a symbol of unity." And I said, "Well, that's great, but I also want symbols of integrity." And I think what bothers me is I don't hear people saying what they really believe sometimes. And that bothers me more than hearing people who really do believe contrary things to me.
Yeah.
I think silence is a deadly enemy to the church, to truth, actually. And hypocrisy, which we're all guilty of. But when it's playing itself out against the welfare and happiness and faith of other people, I think is really unforgivable. So I'm a bit frustrated. I'm a bit ho-hum about it, but I go back to what I said just now. If this isn't the time to show your belief in love and in the miracle of partnerships, I mean, that's the other thing that I want to say is, don't you just think it is a miracle when one person finds another person in life and says, I want to grow old with you. I think I'm more me because there's us. I think that is a minor miracle. And the fact that we are oohing and ahhing about whether we can celebrate that and support it and help people through life, I just think it's terribly sad. And I really want to change it.
Mark, you've managed to beautifully describe how I feel, I have a habit of going all around the houses, saying a lot more before I actually say what I think. And you've summed that up perfectly for me. I wonder if people might be surprised, somebody who was formerly the Dean of St John's College, Cambridge, say, you've got a very simple theology. I wonder, do you think we sometimes another word, if we give too much academia to this, it is very simple, isn't it? To me, I don't think we need long, drawn out theology about where God is, love is, but it seems that others want to make it that way. So I suppose, what would you say to people who would critique you and say, well, you're just not doing enough theology on this. You're making it so simple and easy.
Maybe it is simple and easy. I, I don't want to over complicate something which I just think is so clear in the gospel, that faith is often found by Jesus not to be where it should be, and he often finds it in unexpected places. And I just wish the church could do the same. And if I carried on and talked about my theology, the other simple bit of theology I have is that I believe that God's given us our being. I mean, that's the great gift. We've all been given our being, and we're asked to give a gift back in return for that. And it's called our becoming, who we become. And that's the project that faith is engaging with, that human becoming. This is very Augustinian theology, but that's what I really believe. And for many people, not everybody, but in order to become more human and, of course, more Christian for many of us, means uniting ourselves with another person. I'm sorry if I can't then, write a systematic theology on that with 800 pages. But to me, that's just at the heart of my belief. And I'm going to stick with it until anybody convinces me otherwise. I don't think they're going to.
No, I don't either, Mark.
And I don't want all this to sound, smug and therefore everybody else is wrong. This is all very complex. And of course, we never talk with complete objectivity and clarity. I mean, when I watch General Synod debates and things, quite often you can see that we're touching very raw areas for people. Quite often we're not dealing with reason, we're talking with people's demons, we're talking with people's wounds. And so we need to be patiently attentive to each other, because this is serious. This is about human well-being and human lives. But I also feel pretty resolved in preaching this, because I really do believe it. And I know that others do too. And I hope that they will feel through this LLF process, even more now, they will feel that they can voice it. And if it is within them, to live it. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. I also want to ask you something about something that's quite dear to my heart. I'm proudly working class. I raised a private members motion at General Synod about a national strategy for working class vocations. I've been surprised how much support it's had, and hopefully it may come back for debate. But as somebody who has worked in some of the great places in London and across the country, and I wonder what your view is on working class vocations, Mark, and if you agree with me, I truly believe that the growth in the church will come from these places. I think there's a huge amount of untapped talent out there. There's a huge harvest waiting to be harvested, and we just need to work out how we do that. From both your role as the dean of Southwark Cathedral, but also your place in learning and institutions, what your thoughts were.
Well, I'm really grateful for what you've been doing, for all the estate theology that's been going on. I mean, I just think this is the way to go. As you say, it's just untapped potential. One of the things I would say generally about the Church of England is that we do really need to make this transition now from being some sort of example of power to embodying the power of example. Let's switch it around. So the days of us, flaunting ourselves and positioning ourselves as if we're part of some sort of powerful establishment and that somehow justifies our existence, that is gone. That's gone. Some people are wanting to, keep the funeral going. Those days have gone. And now we really have to, I think, justify ourselves by the power of example. And this, from what you're doing now, I see as part of that. Is this, it is not about where you've been to university and how clever you are and what you're about. It's about who God calls, and about supporting people when they have a very strong sense that they are being called, whatever their background and wherever they be. Although I've got a BBC voice and I have been in sort of posh places, there are two things which are very much part of me. The first is I was brought up by my grandmother. I've never known my mother, although she got in touch with me 3 years ago. My father sort of pushed me away, didn't really like who I was. So although there has been difficulties in my own upbringing and life, they are not what people from other backgrounds are going through. But things aren't always as they seem sometimes. And the other thing that's very important to me is that my partner and I foster children, and quite often we foster young teenage girls on the whole, who come from very difficult backgrounds and quite often arrive very wounded. And I see that, the beauty of fostering is, and the difficulty of it, is that you see the potential and the beauty of that potential. And, in the same way that I'm looking and being around those young people, I would love the church to be doing the same for, everybody in this country that is feeling that they want their potential reached. And it hasn't done it in the past, and that's a shameful thing. So, God strengthen you, I tell you, and what you're doing to get our act together.
Mark, I'm so grateful for your time, because you're affirming what I think, and I want to talk about your writing. This is my book for anybody who's watching. I wrote about that. The one of the saddest things for me is some of the people that I come across is I see the potential that they don't recognize in themselves, and I think God wants that to be recognized and to be realized as well. I've loved chatting to you, Mark. It's been absolutely fabulous half an hour or so. I do want to talk about your love of writing and poetry yourself. I'm a very silly poet. I'm inspired by people like Spike Milligan.
It's wonderful.
And I really enjoy the poetry of Leonard Cohen. I want to get into it more, and I think there is something. I think when we think about the working classes, that kind of poetry is maybe not. They think it's not for them, but I wonder if you could perhaps suggest a poem that maybe crosses the divide. That somebody that might just go, and I know I've landed that on you, and I'm sorry for that. You know, or maybe a poet that maybe people could maybe look up and think, well, you know, Rachel Mann suggested Christina Rossetti to me, and I've enjoyed reading some of her poetry. But is there anybody that springs to mind for you?
Well, if they're a person of faith, I'd be pushing them to R.S. Thomas, probably, who is accessible but also challenging. So, I mean, that's the great thing about poetry, is that it reminds us that difficulty is important sometimes. And although we skirt around it, if you stick with it, it's a bit like looking at a painting, and you don't always know, you don't always have an immediate understanding of it, but you sense that it understands you, so you stay with it. Poems act a bit like that. Seamus Heaney said, you know, poetry is the undeceiving of the world, you know. So there has to be some difficulty if we're going to be undeceived. We have to be ruptured out of our status quo in our way of thinking. I would also, if people want fun, and I'd say read Wendy Cope. If they want some evocative but accessible, I'd say look at your Robert Frost. If they want something mystical and head-scratchingly beguiling, I'd say pick up your Eliot. And if you want something a bit political and often edgy, I go back to Auden quite a lot, W.H. Auden. But there's some fabulous poets alive at the moment, young poets as well. And one of the great things I did a couple of years ago was I was one of the judges of the Ted Hughes Prize for Poetry, and I had to read 120 volumes of poems of contemporary poetry, and there's some fantastic poets out there. Zafar Kunyal, I would commend. He's a really good writer at the moment.
And are you working on anything yourself at the moment? Any publications in the pipeline?
Well, I wrote a little book on George Herbert a couple of years ago, and I am supposed to be writing an equivalent on John Donne, but being a dean takes up a long part of the day. So I hope to teach myself to get up a bit earlier and do something before I go into work. But you know what it's like. Those sort of intentions don't always come to fruition. But I would love to do that, actually. And then I wrote a book called The Splash of Words a few years ago, and some people are encouraging me to write sort of volume 2 of it, which, again, I would love to do, but I will do. Maybe sitting here with you now has resolved me that I must get on with this.
Well, I'll give you a year's deadline, and we'll get you on next year to talk about it when it's coming out and how much it's going to be. And
but you know that, I mean, just to sort of end where we began, why poetry for me is the native language of faith is because it's the language of love. You know, when we fall in love, the last thing we are is a literalist. You're trying to express your feelings, your understanding in this new sense of being with language that you take to the gym. You know, you make it acrobatic, you stretch it, you push it, anything to do its work. And, you know, if we are about love of God and love of neighbor, then poetry is going to be our language. And that's why the liturgy at its best is poetic. It's why we sing poems, what we call hymns. We read them, they're called psalms. You know, this is poetry in motion, the Christian faith. And it all goes slightly sour when we forget that. So, yeah, we started talking about love, and that's why I want to promote poetry, because it is the language of love.
Mark, that's probably a lovely place to end our conversation. Thank you for coming on the Godcast, and hopefully I'll see you in London soon.
I hope so, and thank you for all that you do, by the way, with these interviews, which is such an important ministry to people, to encourage people. And so thank you.
Thank you.